Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted and privileged to welcome a very, very senior and accomplished professional, a fellow member of the YPO, Mr. Chris Chandler from Montreal, Canada. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ashutosh. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Chris is the president and CEO of Perativ, Access Cash, who are basically cash optimization experts. And as I mentioned, he's a member of the YPO. So, Chris, before we get into talking about Perativ, tell me about your own amazing journey.
Well, I'd say that, it didn't run in my family. I guess you would say that I was basically born a business person. I started selling things when I was 6 years old.
Okay.
I got I talked my older brother into getting me a job when I was 13. I was underage. I was the top salesperson in the company.
Wow.
I'm now today both a CPA or a chartered accountant and MBA. So business is my job, but it's also my hobby. I find it fascinating how businesses are run and how they contribute positively to society.
Fascinating. And let's talk about Perativ. Tell me a little bit about this venture and what is your own role in this company?
Yeah, so Perativ started from an ATM business. So Access Cash, which you mentioned, is actually the Canadian ATM division. We have just before COVID more than 10,000 ATMs in Canada. And out of that, we came, the number one cost item in operating ATMs is getting the cash in and out of the machines and paying for the cash. And after the financial crisis, we took a look at that the same way banks are today. And we did all those traditional things, but we asked different questions. And in asking those different questions, we've come up with a completely different way to think about the cash, and it lowered the cash float by 40%, and it took all of the data, unused and unleveraged data, if you will, and made that all productive real-time data. So you have better control, you have better visibility into everything, and you save a lot of money. So that's really what we've done. We've turned that now into a SaaS platform to sell to banks. And I would say that's one of the most exciting and most frustrating things I've been involved with.
Amazing. And when you say, cash optimization, for a lot of my viewers and listeners, help us understand what is the meaning of cash optimization.
It's really focused on banks. So if you think of banks, they have a mission to make sure that customers can get convenient access to their cash anytime, anywhere. So optimizing that cash is really the art, and now with Perativ, the science of striking the balance between having cash available all the time, so the ATMs are not out of cash, but doing that as cost effectively as possible. And I often joke that most of the banks, the system they have is someone was told to use the least amount of cash possible, but don't run out. The machines run out, so an executive yells at them. So they put more cash, they still run out, an executive yells at them. And this cycle continues until they stop getting yelled at. And that's the right amount of cash. And obviously that's not optimized. So
Well said. And when you talk of optimization of cash, what are some of the challenges a lot of businesses face? I mean, as you said very correctly, very often there's no cash in the system. There is sometimes excess cash in the system. And I'm telling you from my own personal experience of running businesses.
Yeah. So again, this is really focused on banks. And I think their biggest challenge is that there's established best practices, which are both your friend, but in this case, they're the enemy. Okay. So it's been several decades where people have a very strict set of best practices. Today, those practices are at their limit. And so banks are starting to outsource to someone else to do those exact same best practices, which is obviously just a mirage. Like they're obviously going to have the same limitations. So really the challenge is how to get bank executives to be willing to expand their thinking. I mean, it's so narrow today that banks are issuing RFPs for cash forecasting, and
Okay.
the scorecards are so narrow they don't allow for any innovation or creativity. So they can only, because of the way they structure their RFP, they can only get the exact same thing they have now, which is obviously not serving them well. So it's a very interesting cycle they're caught in.
Amazing. And over the last few years, I mean, an ATM is an expensive proposition for banks, and it was interesting for me to learn that banks actually do a profit and loss on every ATM. I thought it was just a service a bank gives to me. But with so much digitization happening, do you see a decline in the brick and mortar banking through branches?
I do. I think that the role of the branch is changing. So today you can really, the vast majority of banking can be done either on your phone or your tablet or through a video chat from your phone, right? So just like we're doing a Zoom today. There's really two exceptions to that. One is getting physical cash. So the ATM is still very necessary for distributing cash. And the other is the trust that comes from in-person meetings. So if you think about you investing your money with a bank or their wealth management arm, or you getting lending services and them trusting you to repay the loans, often those things are better in person. So you'll see the branch shift to being really focused on the things that need in-person interactions.
And there's also a lot of talk, Chris, about a digital currency. Several countries have launched it. India has announced it. I think it'll be launched in a few months' time. How will that impact physical cash?
It's I find it funny because I'm not 100% clear. I'm in this business. I spent my life in this. If I send you a wire from Canada to India today, that feels like digital cash to me, right? So it's just so I think what they're really saying when they're talking about governments doing digital cash is that they're going to set up a blockchain. So I think probably in financial services, the number one use of the blockchain will be to replace the international wire system. It's slow, right? To send a wire, it's complicated. You have to hit the deadline. You get their wire a day later. I think that the blockchain will ultimately replace that international wire system. And I think they'll call that digital cash, even though it's the exact same thing as the wire system today. But it's kind of fun to call it digital cash, and it gives you the ability to raise budgets to do blockchain and so on.
Okay.
So I think that's what's happening. Otherwise, I'm not sure what else is the right.
Well, from my limited knowledge and understanding, what I have been seeing is that the digitization of the economy in India, particularly, has brought about a huge amount of financial inclusion. I'd love to get your thoughts on this, and what is your perspective from a developed country?
Well, I think certainly in America, Canada, America, I would say that one of the keys for digital banking is it removes bias, right? So humans are inherently biased. We all have biases. As much as I try not to, everyone has biases. And so you have two things in the physical world. You have the person on the bank side may be exhibiting bias, or the other person may be intimidated or shy and not even go into the bank. When you shift to digital, you remove much of that bias. So the uncomfortable person's comfortable sending their digital information in, and on the other side, it's more objectively evaluated. So I think that's a really substantial change, and it's allowing underserved populations to get served today, I think.
And based on your own vast experience, do you see the world moving increasingly towards a cashless economy, or cash will continue to be king?
So I think a bit of both. So I don't think it will be cashless. I do think it will be less cash, and that's a big difference. So overall, we've seen that cash is very resilient. In developed markets, it's remaining very stable in absolute terms. In developing world, it's growing. So there's more and more cash. During the pandemic, the amount of cash in circulation in Canada and the US went up substantially. Most people don't realize that. And when you read in the paper, or you see on the news that cash has declined, it's usually presented as a percentage of transactions. And that's true, but it's a little misleading, right? So we've microtized transactions. Think back 20 years, you would, if you wanted music, you'd go and buy a CD
Or a
for
cassette player even before
$10.
that.
Yeah, you'd buy a CD for $10 and it would have 10 songs on it. And then Apple iStore comes along and you buy songs one at a time for 99 cents. So you have 10 times more transactions, but you haven't really changed how much cash and credit card and all that kind of stuff. So there's a little bit of game playing on the numbers, but cash is not capturing its growth, its share of the growth. So if you assume, like, I would say 10 years ago, cash was just over 50% of all transactions in North America. It's now fewer transactions, but that absolute amount of cash is very similar. It hasn't really changed one way or another. But GDP has grown, the population has grown, the economy overall has grown, and cash is not getting 50-odd% of the growth. So it's on a relative basis declining. So so I think it's less cash in a total absolute term, but it's not cashless by any stretch.
I agree with you. Coming back to ATMs, I was talking to some of the large banks in India, and they all seem to be reducing their investments in ATMs. And yet all of them are sitting on machines and a lot of real estate. I'd love to get your perspective on what are the economics of setting up an ATM?
Yeah, so I think it depends a little bit on the country. So we actually spent a lot of time trying to establish an ATM business in India back in 2010, 2011.
Okay.
And the cost structure there is different. So most of the ATMs, my recollection of that was they're set up in separate kiosk buildings, and they've got armed guards there at 724, and so there's a different structure to America, where they're typically inside a bank branch that already exists, and so on. I think some developed markets like India was on a gold rush for ATMs from 2010 through recently. They're probably overstretched. And as you put more and more ATMs, the number of transactions per ATM goes down. So I think you're seeing some of that in India. In America, some banks are reducing ATMs, some are growing them. And all of them are looking for a way to lower their cost, right? And the cost of the ATM and cash distribution. So some are outsourcing, some are using surcharge-free networks. We think one of the critical things to do is really look at how they manage cash. So they're all doing it on the paradigm that's been there for 20 years. They're investing more and more in that. They're doing that better and better, and it's still not delivering step change results. They really need to think about it differently.
And do you see any alternative uses coming up for ATM machines, or at least, that huge numbers of equipment sitting all over?
Yeah, so that's probably one of the biggest frustrations in the ATM world is we have 2 or 4 square feet of real estate, and we have a screen, and we think we should be able to do many, many things with that. I had the good fortune way back in 1999. I was consulting, and we were working with one of the largest banks in the U.S. at that time, trying to put tickets to events and postage stamps and prepaid cards and so on onto the ATM. And at that time, all it did was create huge lineups of people angry that they couldn't get their $20 bills. And then fast forward, we've stayed very close to this. There's been some small pockets of success temporarily. We saw phone top-ups be a big hit. Advertising was a flop. So today we're really of the view that it's not sexy, but efficiently dispensing cash is really what ATMs are meant to do. And all of the other stuff often is to, for the manufacturers make more money selling you a more complicated ATM.
Very interesting. Very interesting. My next question to you is about the pandemic, and we all hopefully come out of it now, and that there won't be anything sliding back. How has the pandemic impacted the business of ATMs and cash?
Certainly, I think it's different by country and different by how the country reacted. What we saw in the United States was there was a crash when COVID hit and America locked down. They obviously crashed down. America only locked down for 6 or 8 weeks, and then they reopened, and they chose to do direct stimulus to their citizens, and so ATMs actually boomed. So the transaction volumes in the United States went far above pre-COVID numbers for a period of time. and then they've been settling back down. And some firms are having to deal with they set their budget based on that new big number, and they're having some problems. In Canada, where I am, we've had the opposite. Canada stayed very locked down for almost 2 years.
Yeah.
And so it's really changed patterns. It caused a huge gap in earnings for ATM companies. And we're only now starting, it's been 2.5 years, and we're only now trying to get people back into their offices and back into a regular flow. So I think we're well behind markets like the US in getting our street economy, if you will, back going. So I think we're really
interesting.
struggling.
So Chris, let's now talk a little bit about Perativ. You mentioned that you were pivoting into a SaaS platform. Tell me a little more about that, and what are some of your own challenges and learnings as you are pivoting your own company?
Yeah, so it's been very interesting. I would say back in 2018, we had already built this system for ourselves. We built it internally, and a bank asked us about cash forecasting, and we said, well, no, we can't do that, but we could actually just do everything for you in our system. Over the course of about 18 months, they pursued that with us and wanted to do it. And then the world shifted. They had some other issues. The person that was championing that left the bank. And then we were sat there kind of going, well, what happened? Like, there's clearly an interest here. There's something. So then we said, well, let's turn this into a product. So we've been working very hard. I mean, our mission is to make cash accessible and affordable, and we've now moved that into a platform for banks. And we've been talking with banks around the world. And it's what's challenging. When I said earlier that it's the most exciting and most frustrating, the frustrating part is the solution to unleash the data that the banks have that they don't currently use. We need 3 different groups in the bank to cooperate. So today, ATMs are managed by the ATM group. A lot of the work in the middle is the operations group doing reconciliations. And then the cash is managed by the treasury group. And trying to get these 3 groups to agree on anything is incredibly difficult, even when it's helpful. What's probably the number one thing in our favor is most of the time we've been marketing this, cash was essentially free. So if you think of America, the Federal Reserve rate was between 0 and 0.25%. So what we've seen is, American inflation is about 8% in general, and the inflation in cash costs for ATMs is 1,900%.
Wow.
So it's gone from 0.25%, and Goldman Sachs says by February it'll be 4.75%. So 19 times more expensive. So we think that that's a call to action that banks can't ignore. So that's $45 million for every $1 billion of cash a bank uses. They now just lost $45 million of profitability overnight.
Wow.
So we can help with that, and we're working towards getting banks. We think that's the catalyst for banks to start to really take this seriously.
Fascinating. Would that mean lesser number of ATMs, or would it mean more access for the customer?
I think it will help with one of the pressures in America is to make in the financial inclusion model is to make sure they're represented with ATMs in very poor neighborhoods and so on, and that's just a pure cost for them. And so what we can bring is we bring a lot of visibility and transparency to the data, but we're also lowering the cost of their existing fleet. So some of that lower cost can go to their bottom line, but some of it can be reinvested in these financial inclusion initiatives that they have going on, so that they become self-supporting, right? So the ATM channel can pay for the ATM channel's expansion for financial inclusion. So that I think that's very important, that there are ways to make that self-funding.
Fascinating. So, Chris, I've got time for about 3 or 4 more questions. So I'm going to move to a few questions for you personally, because my viewers and listeners love to get to know my guest a little better. Let me start by asking you that, in such an amazing career that you've had, what would you say are 3 key milestones in your life or your career?
Milestones. I would say number one, getting my chartered accounting or CPA. That was fascinating. It's businesses and governments and others open all their books up to you. They explain how their business works,
Yes.
and you get to ask them all kinds of questions. It's a fascinating base for business. So that's sort of my analytical side. Becoming a CEO. So I grew up in a poor immigrant family. My parents immigrated in 1956 to Canada, and I worked in strategy consulting for a number of years. And during the dot-com boom, someone gave me a chance to run a business, to be the CEO, and that was game changing. So I haven't left the CEO chair since in 1999.
Wow!
But that was a big milestone. And then I think I'd say also the management buyout. So I was a hired employee, if you will. And in 2005, I started, I stepped in to run this ATM business. In 2008, I was able to do a management buyout with a financial partner, another YPO, as a matter of fact. And 4 years later, we sold it for a tremendous gain that essentially helped me become financially secure. So those would be three big milestones for me personally.
Fascinating. My next question to you is, who or what inspires you?
I think a few things. So I think my parents' courage in immigrating. When I heard the stories of, back in the 50s, packing up your bags in northern England and taking the boat over and all that stuff wasn't so easy. So they had a lot of courage, and I think that helped me become a bit of a risk taker and feel that you can recover from things. In business, I'd say it's my former business partner, this fellow that did the MBO with me. He's a self-made billionaire now, probably one of the smartest people I've met. But really what I loved about him was his demonstrations of humility, analytics, generosity, and all the while, being this absolutely world-class, world-leading investor. So he was really a great role model, honestly, for me in business.
Yeah, interesting. And my last question to you, Chris, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your own amazing journey, what would you say are 3 lessons or 3 learnings you would want our viewers and listeners to take away?
I think number one, that risk taking, or even smart risk taking. Risk taking is not just throwing caution to the wind. I mean, you do some analysis, you weigh the odds, you take risk. But so risk taking and persistence, it pays off. Like at every stage of my journey, I've been willing to take risks, and then I stuck with things through adversity, because it never goes smoothly. And if you hang in there and you keep pivoting, and it really pays off. So that would be number one. I would say, specific to Perativ, I'd say trying to find bankers willing to take a modest risk for positive change versus sticking with their decades-old best practice. It's really hard. So that would be lesson 2. And then lesson 3, I'd say that luck is 99% hard work. I think a lot of young people kind of see someone else as being lucky or wish that their luck would change. And my experience is it's 99% hard work. And so there you go.
That is so true. And on that note, Chris, and your 3 wonderful learnings or lessons, which is risk-taking and persistence ultimately pays off. The second one was take a risk for positive change, and I completely agree with you on that. And the third one, which was luck is important, but 99% of what you achieve is hard work, and that is so well articulated. Thank you, Chris, for having such a great conversation with me. Thank you for talking to me about Perativ, about all the work that you're doing with ATMs, about your new SaaS platform. Thank you for talking to me about the future of ATMs and what's going to happen to that. Thank you also for talking to me about cash and how the whole, how the universe of cash is likely to go through a change, but yet cash will continue to be a significant part of our lives. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck.
It's my great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast. A a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.